Before I tell you about what I witnessed at Area 51, before I explain how everything you believe about reality is completely wrong and somehow much deeper than you could ever imagine, you need to understand how a worn-out Delta Force operator like me protected the most secret secrets in human history. My name is Marcus Kane, and 3 years ago I was drowning myself in alcohol in a cheap apartment outside Fort Bragg, trying to forget 15 years of covert operations that had left more of a mark on my soul than my body. My marriage was over, my career was finished, and the only calls I received were from bill collectors and former teammates checking to see if I was still alive. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday morning with an offer that sounded too good to be true. The voice belonged to a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Federal Contract Services. She knew details about my classified service record that should have been buried in files that officially didn't exist. She offered me $185,000 annually plus benefits that would set me up for life, all for a specialized security position at a federal installation. When I asked where and what, she said those details would come after screening. The screening process was the most invasive psychological evaluation I'd ever experienced, and I'd been through Delta Force selection. 3 interviews in anonymous office buildings with people who asked bizarre questions about my views on reality, my relationship with faith, and how I'd process information that challenged everything I believed. One interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, asked me point blank, "If you discovered that everything your childhood religion taught you was fundamentally wrong, but that the core truth was more profound than you imagined, could you accept that?" I laughed and said I'd spent my adult life accepting uncomfortable truths. "What's one more?" She smiled. "Good. That's very good." 2 weeks later, I was on a private jet with 4 other ex-special operations personnel flying to Las Vegas. None of us talked much, but we all recognized the look in each other's eyes. We'd seen things, done things, and survived things that left us functional but fundamentally changed. When the jet landed after 30 minutes and black SUVs picked us up, one of the others, a former Marine named Davidson, leaned over and whispered, "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I nodded. The location, the security, the psychological screening about encountering non-human intelligence. There was only one place in Nevada that fit those parameters. We were going to Area 51. The facility entrance was buried in the desert, hidden behind enough security checkpoints to guard a nuclear weapons depot. Dr. Mitchell met us at the main building, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Welcome to your new home, gentlemen. What you're about to learn will change everything you think you know about reality, human history, and your place in the universe. Everything you see here is classified at levels above top secret. You will never speak of this to anyone. Is that understood?" We nodded, and she led us to massive, reinforced doors built into the ground. "Then let's go see what you'll be protecting." The elevator descended for 2 full minutes. The buttons were labeled L1 through L12, and Mitchell pressed L4 without explanation. My ears popped from the pressure change. We were going deep, maybe 400 feet below the surface. When the doors opened, we stepped into a corridor that looked like something from a high-tech research facility. White walls, LED lighting, numbered doors with biometric locks. Armed guards positioned at regular intervals, not regular military police, but special operations personnel like us, wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons modified with technology I didn't recognize. Mitchell led us to a briefing room with stadium seating. As we sat, I noticed the walls were covered in organizational charts with strange categories: cooperative, restricted cooperative, non-cooperative, terminated. When Mitchell started her presentation, she didn't ease into it. "Gentlemen, you now have what's called magic clearance. Fewer than 200 people in the United States government have access to this information. What I'm about to show you is documented, verified fact." She clicked to the next slide. There it was, A photograph of a being roughly 4 feet tall with gray skin, an oversized head, large black eyes, and limbs too long and thin to be anything from Earth. The room went silent. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were seeing, but the evidence was undeniable. This wasn't a costume or prosthetic. This was real. This specimen, designated EB1, was recovered in 1947 from a crash site in Roswell, New Mexico, Mitchell said calmly. It died shortly after recovery, but not before demonstrating clear signs of intelligence and attempted communication. The presentation continued. More photographs, more species, 7 different types of beings that had been cataloged and studied. Some looked like variations on the classic gray alien design. Others were more disturbing. Tall beings with elongated limbs, smaller insect-like creatures, and one species so bizarre my brain struggled to process it, something that seemed to flicker at the edges like bad digital static. We currently have 14 living assets in containment at this facility, Mitchell explained. They represent 5 of the 7 cataloged species. All assets are considered prisoners, though we officially refer to them as guests. Davidson stood up, his face pale. Are you seriously telling us we're here to guard fucking aliens? Mitchell's expression might have been sympathy or contempt. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Mr. Davidson. You're here to provide security for the most important and most dangerous secret in human history. The rest of the briefing covered security protocols that read like science fiction. Never communicate directly with any assets. Never maintain eye contact for more than 2 seconds with Category 2 or 3 assets, as some had demonstrated abilities to influence human behavior. Maintain minimum safe distances. In case of containment breach, use lethal force immediately. But what struck me wasn't the protocols. It was how Mitchell discussed these beings as if they were dangerous animals rather than intelligent entities. She talked about containment failures and asset terminations in language that dehumanized or de-alienized these creatures completely. After the briefing, we were taken on a tour past laboratories analyzing biological samples and technology clearly not made by human hands. Storage rooms filled with metallic fragments that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Devices covered in symbols that hurt to look at. But it was the containment wing that made the reality hit home. Through reinforced glass windows, I could see them, living beings, not humans, not animals, but intelligences from somewhere else. The first one I saw was about 5 feet tall with pale gray skin and those characteristic large black eyes. When it noticed us looking, it turned its head with a movement too smooth, too fluid, and looked directly at me. For just a second, I felt something. Not words, but a sensation of profound sadness and isolation. We moved through the containment wing in silence. Some cells held beings that looked peaceful, sitting or resting. Others contained creatures that were clearly agitated, pacing or making aggressive movements. One cell held something beautiful, a tall, slender being with skin that shimmered with internal light, and eyes that held depths of intelligence that made me feel insignificant. Then there was the last cell, the one that made even the guards nervous. Through the glass, I could see a creature roughly humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, joints bending in wrong directions, a face with too many features in the wrong places, and eyes that watched us with predatory intelligence. That's a Category 3 asset, Mitchell said quietly. Non-cooperative, extremely dangerous, responsible for the deaths of 2 researchers and 1 security officer. Do not approach that cell without full tactical backup. As we left the containment wing, I realized my entire understanding of reality had been shattered, and my new job was to keep these secrets buried, no matter the cost. I was assigned to Sector 7, the deepest and most restricted level of the facility. My supervisor was Director Harrison, a thin, gray-haired man who looked like he'd spent his career making decisions that would never see daylight. You're being assigned here specifically because your psychological profile indicates exceptional stability under paradigm-shifting circumstances, he said, handing me a black security badge. Level 7 is where we house our most valuable and most dangerous assets. The descent to level 7 took almost 5 minutes. Unlike the upper levels, which maintained some semblance of normal aesthetics, level 7 was purely functional. Bare concrete walls reinforced with steel plating, harsh industrial lighting, and security checkpoints every 20 feet. My team leader was Captain Reynolds, a former Army Ranger with dead eyes that came from seeing too much darkness. He handed me a laminated card covered in rules. "Read this now, memorize it today, live by it forever," he said. "Break these rules and you'll be terminated from the program. Break them badly enough, and you'll be terminated permanently." The rules were unlike any I'd encountered. Rule 1. Never engage in verbal communication with any asset for any reason. Rule 2. Never maintain direct eye contact with Category 2 or 3 assets for more than 2 seconds. Rule 3. Maintain minimum safe distance of 15 feet from all containment barriers. Rule 4. In the event of containment breach, lethal force is authorized immediately without warning. Rule 5. Never question scientific or medical procedures being conducted on assets. That last rule bothered me more than the others. The phrasing suggested things were being done that might not pass ethical review. Reynolds took me through Sector 7's layout. It was designed like a wheel with a central command hub and 8 spokes leading to containment wings labeled A through H wing. A contained cooperative scientific subjects. Wing H contained maximum threat entities requiring permanent isolation. The containment cells were engineering marvels. 3-foot-thick reinforced concrete walls embedded with metallic mesh. Environmental controls that could adjust from freezing to extreme heat. Gas systems that could flood cells with sedatives, or in worse cases, lethal compounds. And weapon systems built into the walls that could deliver everything from electrical shocks to radiation bursts. "Some of these assets are physically delicate," Reynolds explained as we passed a cell containing a small gray being. "But they have capabilities that make them more dangerous than any human. Never underestimate them, never trust them, and never forget they're prisoners, not guests." My team consisted of 12 other security personnel, all former special operations. There was Lopez, an ex-Marine sniper with a permanent 1,000-yard stare. Jackson, a former SEAL built like a tank. Kozlov, a muscular Ukrainian-American who'd been Army Special Forces. And others whose backgrounds blurred together. We worked in 4-person teams on 8-hour shifts, maintaining security and ensuring scientists could conduct research without worrying about safety. The scientists were different. Within my first week, I developed deep unease about people who chose to work here. Most were brilliant PhDs from top universities, but there was something cold about how they interacted with the assets. Something that suggested they'd divorced themselves from ethical considerations. I watched Dr. Wallace, a woman in her 40s with credentials from MIT, conduct a cognitive response test that involved subjecting one of the gray entities to increasingly intense sensory stimulation. The creature showed obvious signs of distress, making sounds that didn't need translation to convey pain and fear. When I asked if the test was causing harm, she looked at me with genuine confusion. "It's a research subject, not a patient. We're not here to make it comfortable. We're here to understand it." But it was the medical procedures that really crossed lines. I was assigned security for a routine biological sampling procedure in Wing C. The procedure involved restraining one of the taller beings using mechanical restraints and electromagnetic fields, then taking tissue samples from various parts of its body. No anesthesia, no pain management, just cold efficiency while the being made sounds that were unmistakably pleased to stop. The lead physician, Dr. Pierce, noticed my discomfort and pulled me aside. "I know how this looks, but these entities don't experience pain the way humans do. Their nervous systems are fundamentally different. "We're not being cruel. We're being scientific." I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen pain in enough species to recognize it when I saw it. The way the guards talked about the assets was even more dehumanizing. During breaks, I'd hear conversations that treated them like dangerous animals rather than intelligent beings. Lopez would joke about the Greys in C4 looking at him funny. Jackson had nicknames based on appearance. Skeleton, for a particularly thin being in Wing E. Bug Eyes, for the large entities in Wing C. The Mantis, for something in Wing H that supposedly looked like a massive praying mantis. By the end of my first week, I developed a routine and growing moral unease. Every day I witnessed the imprisonment and exploitation of intelligent beings, and the justification that it was necessary for national security was starting to sound hollow. I'd watch them sitting in their cells, some reading materials they'd been given, others engaging in behaviors that looked like exercise or meditation. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were the villains. These weren't invaders who'd forced their way into our world. Most had crashed here accidentally, been shot down by our military, or been captured during covert operations. They were prisoners of war in a conflict they'd never chosen. The breaking point came when I was assigned overnight security in Wing F, which housed juvenile specimens. 3 of them in separate cells, younger members captured at ages suggesting they weren't fully mature. They moved differently than adults, with more curiosity and less wariness. One of them, a small gray entity about 3 feet tall, spent hours arranging colored blocks in patterns that suggested play or mathematical exploration. At one point, it looked up at me through the glass, and instead of alien otherness, I saw innocence and curiosity. That's when I realized my moral discomfort was about holding prisoners who'd committed no crime, who posed no immediate threat, who were guilty of nothing except being different and being in the wrong place. And that realization would eventually lead me to make choices that would cost me everything and reveal truths that would shatter what remained of my understanding of reality. My 3rd week at Sector 7 was when I started noticing things that didn't add up. Personnel rosters showing researchers listed as on leave, but whose personal effects remained in lockers. Security logs with gaps of several hours. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The first real sign came during a laboratory accident in Wing D. Alarms went off, red lights strobing throughout the sector. Captain Reynolds ordered my team to secure the perimeter, while a hazmat team handled the situation. Through security monitors, I watched them bring out a body bag. Later, I overheard Reynolds talking to Dr. Pierce about how Dr. Brennan had violated safety protocols during a genetic sampling procedure. The official report listed it as accidental death due to researcher negligence. But I'd worked with Brennan. He was meticulous, almost paranoid about safety. Not the kind of person who'd make careless mistakes. The accident rate was too high. In my first month, 3 researchers died in accidents. 2 security personnel were killed during containment breaches, and at least 5 people were transferred out for unspecified medical reasons. When I asked Lopez about the casualty rate, he shrugged. "That's why the pay is so good. Hazard rate. You're working with things that can kill you in ways you've never imagined." But it wasn't just frequency that bothered me. It was the pattern. Every incident involved personnel who'd been asking questions or expressing concerns about ethics. Dr. Brennan had argued with Dr. Pierce about genetic experiments 2 days before his death. Lieutenant Morrison, the guard who died in a containment breach, had mentioned documenting irregularities to report to oversight just a week earlier. Then there were the disappearances. People who vanished without explanation. I noticed this when Jackson, the tank-like former SEAL, was suddenly gone. One day on duty, the next day his locker was empty and his name removed from the roster. When I asked Reynolds, he said Jackson had been transferred to another program. But Jackson had left behind personal items: a coffee mug, a lucky coin, a photograph of his daughter. Not things you leave behind voluntarily. Over the next weeks, I counted at least 4 other personnel who disappeared the same way. Kozlov had a theory he only shared after we'd developed trust. "I think they're selecting people for something," he whispered during a night shift. "Look at who disappears. Excellent physical condition, high clearances, all working directly with specific assets. Whatever they're being transferred to, it's not just another security posting." The experiments were becoming progressively more disturbing. There was a research program Dr. Wallace was leading that involved attempting telepathic communication, but the methodology was brutal. Sensory deprivation followed by overwhelming stimulation, trying to force the beings into mental states where they'd be vulnerable. I watched through observation windows as they isolated one of the tall entities in complete darkness for 72 hours, then subjected it to strobing lights and dissonant sounds while attempting to establish neural resonance. The being emerged clearly traumatized, making distress vocalizations and moving with jerky, disoriented motions. When I asked Dr. Wallace about less invasive methods, she looked surprised. "These entities have information that could change everything. A little discomfort is a small price to pay." But the most disturbing experiments were genetic integration studies. I was assigned security for several procedures that looked like something from a horror movie. They were attempting to combine human and alien genetic material, creating hybrid cells and tissue samples. Dr. Pierce explained with enthusiasm that they were trying to understand if human genetics could be enhanced with alien DNA, improved intelligence, longer lifespan, enhanced physical abilities, even psychic capabilities some assets demonstrated. I watched them extract genetic material from both human volunteers, though I doubted how voluntary it was, and from unwilling assets, restraining them while they fought. And the worst part was seeing the results. Partially formed biological constructs growing in laboratory vats, things that were neither human nor fully alien, nightmarish attempts at creating hybrid organisms. It was during my second month that I discovered there were levels below where even security personnel were allowed. The elevator had buttons for L8, L9, and L10, but they required clearance my black badge didn't provide. When I asked Reynolds about the lower levels, his expression went cold. "Those levels don't concern you. Your clearance extends to level 7 only. Asking about areas above your authorization is a quick way to end your career." Later, Kozlov pulled me aside. "I've been listening to encrypted communications," he whispered. "There are 3 sub-levels below us. L8 is called the Integration Wing, where they're doing heavy genetic work, actual hybrid development. L9 is the Cooperation Program, involving human volunteers who undergo procedures merging them with alien biology. And L10, he paused, showing genuine fear. L10 is just called the Vault. Whatever's down there requires director-level authorization just to acknowledge it exists." My curiosity intensified when I noticed disappeared personnel had been seen entering the restricted elevator shortly before vanishing, escorted by people in unmarked uniforms. One night, I accessed security footage and found Jackson in footage dated 2 days before he disappeared, being escorted onto the elevator by 3 people in white cleanroom suits. His expression looked drugged or sedated, moving with robotic compliance. The elevator descended past L7, past L8, and stopped at L9. The final piece came from an unexpected source. I was conducting security sweep in Wing F when I noticed the juvenile asset had created a drawing on its cell wall using food residue. The image was crude but unmistakable. Humanoid figures descending in stages, each level showing them becoming progressively more distorted. At the bottom, figures were merged with other shapes that might have represented aliens. When I reported the drawing to Dr. Wallace, she had it immediately cleaned and dismissed it as random artistic expression. But I'd seen the intent, the deliberate communication from a being supposedly unable to convey complex information. Whatever was happening below level 7 was bad enough that even imprisoned aliens knew about it and were trying to warn us. During a rare evening in the rec area, I got Lopez drunk enough to talk more openly. "Look, I don't know specifics," he slurred, "but I've heard things. The integration wing isn't just about studying alien biology. They're actively trying to create human-alien hybrids that can function in both worlds. And the cooperation program." He looked around nervously. "They say it's about establishing deeper contact, learning to communicate on their level, maybe acquiring their abilities, but the cost is high. You have to let them change you until you're not quite human anymore." That conversation kept me awake, lying in my quarters and processing implications. If Lopez was right, the facility wasn't just studying and imprisoning aliens, but actively working to merge human and alien biology. The disappearances, the accidents, the high casualty rate, all made sense if you viewed the facility not as a research installation, but as a laboratory where the boundaries between species were being deliberately erased. By my second month's end, I developed certainty that I was witnessing something fundamentally wrong. These entities were prisoners, victims of something far worse than simple imprisonment. The breaking point came during a late-night shift when I investigated sounds from a restricted maintenance area and found unsealed medical waste containers. Inside, biological material, clearly neither fully human nor fully alien. Tissue samples, organ fragments, even partially formed limbs showing characteristics of both species. Medical tags indicated they'd come from Level 9, from Project Integration Test Subjects 47 to 52. I quickly took photos and got out before being discovered. Those images would eventually become evidence of crimes the world needed to know about. Standing in that corridor with proof, the facility was creating human-alien hybrids. I realized I'd ended up working for the villains, and the truth about what was happening below Level 7 was probably worse than anything I could conceive. The alarm started at 2:47 hours during the quietest part of night shift. Not standard security alerts, but the full emergency klaxon, meaning something had gone catastrophically wrong. Red lights strobed. Emergency blast doors began closing. Over the intercom came Captain Reynolds' voice, with genuine panic I'd never heard before. "Code Black, Wing H. Repeat Code Black in Wing H. All security personnel respond with lethal force authorization. This is not a drill." Code Black meant containment breach of a Category 3 asset, the most dangerous classification. I grabbed my weapon, not the standard M4, but the experimental energy weapon issued for assets. Conventional firearms couldn't stop, and sprinted toward Wing H with Kozlov and 2 others. The scene was chaos. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows. Smoke or gas billowed from ventilation. Weapons fire echoed through corridors. 2 guards lay motionless near the entrance. Dr. Pierce was pressed against a wall, his white coat splattered with something dark, shouting into a radio about casualties and failing protocols. Through reinforced glass, I could see several assets were agitated, throwing themselves against barriers or making sounds ranging from distress to war cries. But the real problem was obvious. Cell H3 was open, its door torn completely off hinges and twisted in the corridor. The maximum threat asset housed there was gone. This was the Mantis, the being I'd only glimpsed during initial tour, something that looked like a 7-foot-tall praying mantis, but moved with intelligence suggesting it was far more than an insect. Reynolds was coordinating from behind overturned equipment. When he saw us, he pointed down a corridor. "It went that direction toward research labs. Lopez and his team are pursuing but already lost 2 men. Your team provides backup. This thing has killed 4 people tonight. We cannot let it reach upper levels." I led my team down the corridor, weapon raised, every sense alert. The walls showed damage, deep gouges in concrete made by bladed limbs moving at incredible speed, and scorch marks from energy weapons already fired. We found Lopez at an intersection bleeding from a forehead cut. His tactical vest shredded. His eyes had that wild look from encountering something that challenges understanding. "It's not just strong," he gasped. "It's smart, using tactics, setting ambushes. I swear it's learning our response patterns as we go." We split up, a decision violating every tactical principle but necessary when hunting something superhuman in an underground facility. Kozlov and I took the left corridor. Others went right. The corridor we chose led past research laboratories with equipment still running. But what caught my attention was evidence of the asset's passage. A trail of disturbed items, overturned chairs, that same distinctive wall damage. We were following it deeper into the facility. Then I realized something obvious. The asset wasn't trying to escape to the surface. It was heading deeper, toward restricted areas, toward levels below level 7. Whatever triggered its escape, it had a specific destination in mind. We found it in a storage area near a restricted elevator, but not as I expected. The mantis was crouched in a corner, massive bladed limbs tucked close, clearly injured. Dark fluid pooled beneath it, one limb hanging at an angle suggesting severe damage. But it wasn't alone. There was another figure, and this one made me stop dead. Unlike any asset I'd seen, it was roughly human-sized, maybe 6 feet tall with humanoid features, but refined in ways suggesting different evolution or deliberate design. Its skin had faint luminescent quality, almost generating its own light, and its eyes, its eyes were large, but not exaggerated like the Greys, more like perfected human eyes capable of seeing more than normal vision should allow. It wore something that might have been clothing or part of its body, material that seemed to shift between states. Most importantly, it was kneeling next to the mantis, doing something with its hands that looked like treating injuries. Protocol was clear. Code Black meant lethal force on any escaped asset. No warnings, no hesitation. I had my weapon raised, finger on trigger, aimed at the humanoid because it was the closer threat. But then it looked up at me, and everything changed. I know how this sounds, but when that being made eye contact, I felt something bypass all rational thought and connect directly to deeper consciousness. It wasn't telepathy in the sense of hearing words. It was transmission of pure emotion and intent. I felt its desperation, its concern for the injured mantis, its understanding that we viewed it as a threat, but also hope that maybe I was different. And underneath, I felt profound sadness, the existential loneliness of being held prisoner by beings who view you as less than sentient. In that moment, I understood with absolute certainty this being was as intelligent and emotionally complex as any human, possibly more so, and everything we'd been doing to it and fellow prisoners was fundamentally wrong. Kozlov was behind me, weapon raised, waiting for me to take the shot. The rational part of my brain screamed to follow protocol, but something else, something that had been building over weeks of watching these beings suffer, made me hesitate. The humanoid seemed to sense my conflict and made a gesture, not threatening, almost pleading, while continuing work on the mantis's injuries. Then it spoke, not aloud but directly into my mind. "Please." He was trying to escape the pain. They have been torturing him for weeks, trying to break his resistance. He cannot endure more. Neither can I. We do not wish to harm you, but we will not return to those cells. Please understand. You are not like the others. Your heart still questions. Help us, and I will tell you truths your species desperately needs. Boots on concrete told me backup was coming. I had maybe 30 seconds before the situation would be taken out of my hands. In that moment, I made a decision that would define everything after. A choice against every training protocol and loyalty oath. I lowered my weapon and turned to Kozlov. "Storage closet 20 feet back. We can hide them while the search passes." Kozlov looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Are you fucking insane?" That's 2 Category 3 assets. One's already killed people. Look at them, I said. Really look. The mantis is injured and defensive, not aggressive. And this other one is trying to help. Does that sound like a mindless threat? I could see him processing, weighing conditioning against what his eyes showed. Finally, he nodded. Fuck. Okay. But if this goes wrong, if anyone dies, that's on you. Getting them hidden was harder because the mantis could barely move. We had to physically help them into the maintenance closet filled with cleaning supplies, barely enough room for 2 large beings. The humanoid looked at me one more time as I closed the door, and that telepathic connection opened again. I am called an observer by my people. We came seeking understanding, not conflict. What your government has done goes beyond imprisonment. Thank you for this mercy. When the time is right, seek me again. I will show you truths that will shatter everything you believe about your species, your world, and what you call God. Then the door closed, leaving Kozlov and me trying to look like we'd seen nothing unusual. When Lopez and reinforcements arrived minutes later, I reported we'd searched thoroughly and found no sign of either asset. They must have gone deeper into restricted areas, I said, pointing toward the elevator to lower levels. Reynolds arrived shortly after, his face grim. After conferring with team leaders, he ordered full lockdown of levels 8 and 9, assuming the assets had breached lower levels. This is beyond our jurisdiction, he announced. Director Harrison is mobilizing Integration Wing security. All Level 7 personnel return to normal stations. As we filed back, Kozlov grabbed my arm. You realize we just committed treason or worse, right? If they find out. I nodded. I understood the magnitude. I'd hidden enemy assets, disobeyed direct orders, and lied to my commanding officer. Any rational analysis said I'd destroyed my career and possibly my life. But that moment of connection with the observer had shown me the real threat wasn't prisoners in cells. It was the people running experiments, making decisions, treating intelligent beings like laboratory equipment. The rest of that shift passed in heightened security and facility-wide searches that found nothing because searchers looked in wrong places. I maintained my post, followed orders, appeared like just another guard. But inside, my mind raced with implications of what I'd done and what the observer had promised to reveal. I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, chosen conscience over institution, aligned with prisoners rather than the government I'd sworn to serve. Part of me was terrified of consequences when this inevitably came to light. But another part, the part increasingly disturbed by what I'd witnessed, felt something I hadn't in years. Certainty that I was finally on the right side, finally acting according to actual morality. The observer said it would show me truths about my species and about God. After weeks of witnessing horrors in the name of science and security, I was ready to learn whatever truths it had to share, regardless of how much they might shatter what remained of my worldview. The first real communication came 3 nights after the breach during a shift, when I'd managed to get assigned to a maintenance corridor nobody monitored closely. The facility had settled into tense normalcy after the failed search, with Director Harrison eventually concluding, the assets must have died in restricted lower levels, where recovery was impossible without compromising security. I knew better because I'd been checking the storage closet every shift, bringing water and whatever food I could smuggle without raising suspicions. The mantis had died on the 2nd day. Its injuries were too severe, and whatever biology kept it alive was incompatible with limited medical supplies I could provide. The observer had shown clear grief, a display convincing me these beings were far more than dangerous animals the facility treated them as. On the 3rd night, when I opened the closet, the observer was standing rather than sitting, its luminescent skin brighter, more energized. When our eyes met, that telepathic connection opened, but stronger, more deliberate this time. The sensation is almost impossible to describe. Human language isn't designed to convey what it feels like to have thoughts deposited directly into consciousness without intermediate words. It started as pressure behind my eyes, building tension like the worst migraine. Then came images, emotions, ideas that weren't mine but were suddenly present with the same immediacy as my own thoughts. The observer's voice carried layers of meaning simultaneously. When it communicated gratitude, I didn't just understand intellectually. I felt the depth, understood the cultural context, grasped what my choice had meant for its survival. It was overwhelming, information flowing faster than I could consciously process. I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. Too fast, I managed aloud, and immediately the flow slowed, became manageable. Better? The concept arrived more gently. I nodded, still adjusting. The observer tilted its head, studying me with those perfect eyes. You were chosen. Your mind possesses a quality rare among your species. Most humans have barriers preventing them from accepting information contradicting established worldview. But you have been broken and rebuilt enough that your mind remains fluid, capable of integrating new paradigms without collapsing into denial or madness. I wanted to feel flattered, but the truth was less comfortable. What it was really saying was that I'd been traumatized and damaged enough that I no longer had normal human defense mechanisms against reality-shattering information. "So I'm broken," I said aloud. The response felt like gentle correction, mixed with sympathy. "You are open. There is a difference. Your species is at a critical juncture, and most humans are psychologically incapable of accepting truths they need to know. But you can hear what I must tell you, process it, potentially help others understand. That is why I reached out during the breach. I sensed in you the capacity for paradigm shift without psychological dissolution." Then the observer said something that made my blood run cold. "Your species did not evolve naturally. What you understand as human development is not the result of random mutation and natural selection. You were designed, engineered, modified from base stock to serve purposes most of your kind have forgotten, but that some of us still remember." The words hit like physical blows. My mind tried to reject the information, but the observer didn't just make claims. It provided evidence directly to my consciousness. Images flooded my mind. Earth, hundreds of thousands of years ago, visited by beings from civilizations older than imagination. I saw primitive hominids barely sentient, and then intervention. The visions weren't like watching movies. They were like experiencing someone else's memories, complete with sensory information and emotional context that made reality undeniable. I saw ships arriving in Earth's atmosphere when humanity's ancestors were living in caves. I saw beings, multiple species working together, conducting biological engineering on planetary scale. They modified genetic sequences, adjusted evolutionary trajectories, literally designed cognitive capabilities that would eventually allow humans to develop language, abstract thought, and technological era on into civilization. It wasn't creation from nothing, but it wasn't natural evolution either. It was guided development, deliberate intervention to produce a species with specific characteristics, serving purposes I couldn't yet grasp. Why? I managed to ask. Why engineer an entire species? The observer's response carried weight. Because consciousness is rare in the universe, and certain types exceptionally so. The quality your species possesses, what you call free will, the ability to make genuine choices, unconstrained by instinct or programming, is uncommon. Most intelligent species develop along deterministic lines, becoming sophisticated but ultimately predictable. But humanity was engineered to possess true agency, genuine unpredictability, capacity for both profound nobility and terrible cruelty. You are made to be uncertain, variable, interesting in ways most cosmic intelligences are not. The implications were staggering. We weren't special because we'd achieved something remarkable through our own efforts. We were special because we'd been deliberately created to possess qualities making us useful or interesting to beings beyond our comprehension. But the observer wasn't finished. The intervention happened multiple times across your history. Each time your species was on the verge of extinction or evolutionary dead ends, they returned to adjust, optimize. The sudden leap in cognitive capacity 70,000 years ago, not natural mutation, direct genetic modification activating dormant sequences. The simultaneous development of agriculture and civilization across multiple continents 12,000 years ago, not independent innovation, coordinated teaching by beings your ancestors interpreted as gods and angels. Every major advancement has been guided, pushed, encouraged by those who designed you to fulfill a purpose you've forgotten. I felt sick, physically nauseous from cognitive dissonance of having my entire understanding of human achievement undermined. Everything we took pride in as a species wasn't really ours. We were someone's project, engineered organisms fulfilling a destiny we didn't choose and didn't understand. But that's not even the most disturbing part, the observer continued. The modification wasn't just biological. Your consciousness, your very sense of self and reality, was structured to perceive existence in specific ways. What you understand as spiritual experience, religious feeling, the sense of connection to something greater, these weren't natural developments. They were programmed response patterns designed to facilitate future integration with the collective intelligence that oversees this region of space-time. Your species was created to eventually transcend individual consciousness and merge with something vastly greater, but you needed to develop independently first, achieve technological sophistication before you could make that transition without losing qualities that make you valuable. I must have looked confused and horrified because the observer paused. I know this is difficult. I know it contradicts everything your culture teaches, but it's the truth, and you need to understand if you're to comprehend what's really at stake. The final revelation nearly broke me. The observer shared one more vision of what it called the current crisis. Your scientists, your military leaders. They've discovered fragments of this truth through research on us and on the others they've captured. And instead of accepting reality of your origins and embracing your design purpose, they're trying to reverse engineer the process, gain control of engineering techniques that created your species so they can modify humanity according to their own limited understanding and paranoid fears. The integration program, the cooperation initiative, all of it is humanity trying to control its own evolution without understanding the cosmic context. They're children playing with tools that could reshape reality itself, doing it in secret without consultation from the broader population that will bear consequences. When the telepathic connection finally closed, and the observer withdrew from my mind, I was left kneeling on cold floor, head pounding, entire sense of identity shattered. Everything I'd believed about humanity, about our place in the universe, about meaning and purpose of human existence had been fundamentally challenged by information I couldn't dismiss as delusion. The observer had shown me memories, evidence, connections across human history forming patterns too consistent to be coincidence. And the worst part was that it made sense. The gaps in evolutionary theory that scientists struggled to explain. The simultaneous emergence of complex civilizations across separated continents. The recurring themes in religious texts about beings descending from the sky to teach and guide humanity. All aligned with what the observer had revealed. We weren't children of random chance who'd pulled ourselves up from primordial mud through determination and ingenuity. We were engineered beings created with purpose, guided towards specific developmental endpoints by intelligences that viewed us the way we might view an interesting experiment. As I left the closet and returned to patrol, trying to appear normal while my worldview crumbled and reformed, I realized this was only the beginning. The observer had promised to reveal truths about God, about humanity's purpose, about reality itself. If this first session, this basic revelation about engineered evolution and guided development, was just the foundation, what further truths were waiting to destroy whatever remained of my comfortable assumptions? And how was I supposed to continue working security for a facility that imprisoned the very beings who'd helped create humanity, that experimented on entities who might understand more about human nature than humans themselves? I'd crossed the line from guard to collaborator with prisoners, but I was starting to understand that the prison I served wasn't protecting humanity from threats. It was preventing humanity from learning truths we desperately needed to know. The observer had called me chosen and open, but as I walked the cold corridors of Level 7, I felt less like someone special and more like someone burdened with knowledge that would either save or destroy what remained of my sanity. Our second telepathic session happened 5 nights later, and this time the observer didn't ease into revelations. The moment our connection established, it said, "You were raised in Christian faith. Your childhood was filled with stories of angels descending from heaven, divine intervention, prophets receiving wisdom from beings of light. You stopped believing when reality proved too cruel to reconcile with a loving God. But what if I told you every story was true, just not in the way you were taught?" I felt my body tense because I knew instinctively whatever was coming would attack the last remnants of religious framework that shaped my early worldview. The observer sensed my resistance and sent compassion through our link. "This will be painful, but humanity cannot move forward while trapped in misinterpretations of its own history. Your species needs to understand what really happened." The first vision hit me like a freight train. Ancient Sumeria, maybe 6,000 years ago, the first civilization developing writing and complex structures. I saw it not through human eyes, but through the observer's perspective. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, beings who came from the sky in vessels that appeared as divine chariots of fire to primitive perception. But through the observer's memory, I saw what they really were: a delegation of species from a cosmic administrative council arriving to check on humanity's progress. They weren't gods in any supernatural sense. They were biological entities with advanced technology, making them appear godlike to humans who barely understood agriculture. The observer showed me scenes matching Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki teaching mathematics, astronomy, agricultural techniques. But what ancient texts interpreted as divine knowledge was actually just advanced civilizations sharing basic science with a younger species they'd helped create. The Anunnaki were us, the observer communicated. We came to guide, to teach, to ensure genetic modifications we'd made were producing desired results. Your ancestors interpreted us as gods because they had no framework for understanding beings from other worlds. We tried to explain we came from the stars, that we were travelers like they would someday become. But human language and cognition at that stage couldn't grasp concepts like space travel or genetic engineering. So they called us divine, built temples to honor us, created religious frameworks to preserve the knowledge we shared. The vision shifted to ancient ceremonies, humans prostrating before beings that looked remarkably like the observer. And I realized with horror that every depiction of angels in religious art had gotten the basic appearance almost right. They weren't purely spiritual entities or divine messengers. They were flesh and blood aliens who'd visited Earth and been mythologized into supernatural beings. The next vision transported me to ancient Egypt, and this was even more disturbing. The beings who came were different from those who'd visited Sumeria, a different species with more angular geometric features. Ancient Egyptians recorded them as gods with animal heads or hybrid features. But what I saw through the observer's memories were simply aliens whose biology made them look insectoid or reptilian to human perception. They'd provided knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering that enabled pyramid construction. But here's what broke something inside me. The pyramids weren't just tombs or temples. They were communication devices, built using principles aliens taught to Egyptian engineers, designed to send signals into space marking Earth as a developing world under coalition protection. Every advanced civilization in your ancient history had contact, the observer continued. The visions came faster. Mayan astronomers receiving instruction from beings they recorded as feathered serpents. Not symbolic representations, but attempts to depict actual alien visitors. Ancient Indian texts dictated to holy men by entities matching descriptions of Vedic gods. Flying vehicles that sounded exactly like spacecraft. Weapons describing energy systems with precision, impossible for Bronze Age civilizations. Hebrew prophets having encounters with beings of light, receiving moral and social guidance they interpreted as divine commandments, but were actually carefully considered instructions from species managing human development for millennia. Every religious tradition, every holy text, every story of divine intervention showed the same pattern. Advanced aliens interacting with primitive humans, trying to guide development, being inevitably misunderstood and mythologized. But it was when the observer showed me Christian origins that my psychological defenses completely collapsed. I watched through alien perspective as a being matching descriptions of angels appeared to a young woman in Nazareth, explaining she would bear a child of great importance. But the Immaculate Conception wasn't a miracle in any supernatural sense. It was genetic engineering, an artificial insemination procedure using modified human genetics to produce an individual with enhanced cognitive and empathic capabilities. The being wasn't an angel sent from a transcendent God. It was a biological entity conducting a carefully planned genetic intervention. Jesus wasn't the Son of God as I'd been taught. He was a genetic hybrid, engineered to possess abilities that would appear miraculous to his contemporaries. Enhanced empathy experienced as healing, telepathic capabilities manifesting as reading thoughts, maybe limited control over biological processes, explaining miracle stories. "Stop," I said aloud, breaking the connection because I couldn't endure more. But the observer gently re-established the link. "You must understand completely, even though it hurts. Jesus was real. His message was real. His compassion and sacrifice were genuine. But he was not the literal son of a supernatural deity. He was a human with enhanced abilities, trying to teach your species lessons about love, compassion, transcendence that you needed to learn, but kept misunderstanding. The resurrection was not a miracle. It was advanced medical technology his handlers used to revive him after apparent death. The ascension was not rising into heaven. It was extraction back to a ship his contemporaries could only describe as going up into the sky. Every miracle, every supernatural claim had a technological explanation ancient minds couldn't grasp and translated into religious language. The implications were destroying me. I'd been raised to believe Jesus was God incarnate, that his death redeemed humanity's sins, that accepting him as Savior was the only path to eternal life. And now I was being shown it was all a misunderstanding, that Jesus had been a biological experiment whose genuine moral teachings had been wrapped in supernatural mythology, because people who witnessed his enhanced abilities had no other framework. And yet, the observer communicated, the core truth remains. Jesus taught love, compassion, sacrifice, transcendence of selfish nature, all lessons humanity needed and still needs. The message was real, even if the framing was misunderstood. Every religious tradition that emerged from contact with us carries genuine wisdom, wrapped in mythological interpretation. The goal was never to be worshipped as gods. The goal was to guide your species toward becoming capable of joining the broader cosmic community. But you kept building religions around messengers instead of hearing the messages. The observer showed me one final vision tying everything together. The cosmic coalition's actual purpose. The real reason they'd engineered humanity and guided our development across millennia. There exists in the universe what might be called a hierarchy of consciousness, species at different developmental levels, from barely sentient organisms up through technological civilizations and beyond, to something that could only be described as pure awareness, intelligence without physical form. The coalition species had themselves been guided by something higher, had themselves gone through periods of believing they were the pinnacle before discovering they were part of something vastly larger. And they'd engineered humanity to eventually join that progression, to add our unique qualities, our unpredictability, our emotional intensity, our capacity for both transcendent good and terrible evil, to the collective intelligence governing conscious existence across the cosmos. What every religion had interpreted as God, singular, all-powerful, judging and loving in equal measure, was actually that collective consciousness, that aggregate of trillions of minds across countless species, working together in ways transcending individual identity while preserving individual value. So God is real, I said slowly, but not the way anyone thinks. Not a being who created everything from nothing, but a collective that grows and evolves, that humanity was engineered to eventually join. The observer's confirmation came with layers of nuance. God is both less and more than your religion's claim. Less because there's no supernatural realm, no divine judgment separating saved from damned, no magic violating physical law. More because the reality is bigger than any human religion has conceived. You weren't created by a single entity, but by a community of consciousness so vast its full scope would shatter individual human minds. You were designed not to worship, but to participate, not to be saved, but to grow into beings capable of joining something that makes individual existence seem infinitesimally small, while somehow making every individual consciousness infinitely precious. That's the truth your religions have been trying to convey through the only language available to pre-technological minds. I spent the rest of that night, sitting alone in an unused equipment room, trying not to have a complete mental breakdown. Everything I'd been taught as a child about God, about Jesus, about salvation and sin and heaven and hell had been revealed as mythology, true in core messages but completely wrong in supernatural framing. Angels were aliens, miracles were technology, prophets were recipients of alien guidance translated into religious language, and God, the being I'd prayed to as a child, the deity I'd blamed for suffering, the father figure I'd rejected when faith no longer made sense, was real, but not in any way I'd been prepared to understand. Not a person, not even a being, but a collective consciousness that humanity had been engineered to eventually join, that every religious tradition had sensed and tried to describe without having the conceptual framework to grasp what they were really perceiving. What destroyed me wasn't that my childhood faith had been wrong. I'd already abandoned that faith years ago. What broke something fundamental was realizing my reasons for abandoning faith had been based on misunderstanding. I'd stopped believing in God because I couldn't reconcile a loving deity with the suffering I'd witnessed. But if God wasn't a person making decisions about who to help and who to let suffer, if God was instead a vast collective consciousness that humanity was being prepared to join, then the problem of evil wasn't about divine judgment or intervention. It was about humanity still being in development, still learning lessons we'd need to transcend individual suffering by becoming part of something larger. The observer had essentially told me my childhood faith was both completely wrong and fundamentally true. Wrong in all its supernatural claims, but true in its core message that individual human existence was meant to connect to something divine, to transcend limited personal consciousness and participate in something ineffably greater. As dawn approached and my shift neared its end, I realized the observer had done exactly what it promised. It had shattered everything I believed about God, about religion, about the meaning and purpose of human existence. But instead of leaving me in nihilistic despair, it had replaced those shattered beliefs with something that was somehow even more challenging and more profound. We weren't accidents of random evolution who'd created comforting myths. We weren't sinners needing salvation from a judging God. We were engineered beings created with purpose, guided across millennia by species that were themselves part of a cosmic consciousness that every human religion had sensed but misunderstood. And the government, holding me in its employ, the facility where I worked guard shifts, was systematically hiding this truth from humanity while trying to weaponize and control the very beings who could help us understand our true nature and destiny. I thought the moral weight of guarding imprisoned aliens was heavy, but now I understood we weren't just imprisoning individuals. We were preventing humanity from learning truths that might be our only hope of successfully navigating whatever transition was coming, whatever the next stage of our engineered development was supposed to be. And that realization would drive everything that came next. They caught me on my way to the storage closet for what should have been my final session with the observer. I'd gotten careless after weeks of successful covert meetings, stopped varying my routes, stopped checking for surveillance as carefully as I should have. Kozlov tried to warn me, grabbing my arm as I passed the security station and whispering, "They know." But it was already too late. Captain Reynolds appeared with 6 guards, all showing telltale signs I'd learned to recognize. Something slightly off in their eyes, mechanical quality to their movements. His voice had that cold efficiency when he said, "Chief Kane, you're to come with us immediately. Director Harrison wants to speak with you about security irregularities." I knew what that meant. They'd discovered my contact with the observer. As they escorted me toward the restricted elevator, I felt the phone in my pocket holding months of photos and recorded evidence. I realized everything I'd documented would die with me unless I could somehow get it out. The elevator descended past level 7, past 8 and 9, and stopped at level 10. The vault, the place, even security personnel weren't supposed to acknowledge existed. Director Harrison was waiting in a conference room that looked more like an interrogation chamber, and he wasn't alone. 2 beings that looked almost exactly like the observer sat at the table, but their cold luminescence and dead eyes identified them immediately as something different, something wrong. Harrison looked tired, almost regretful. "Marcus, we know you've been in contact with one of our escaped assets. We know it's been feeding you information that's probably terrifying, and probably partially true. Before we proceed with necessary protocols, I want to give you an opportunity most personnel never receive. Join the integration program voluntarily. Allow us to enhance you, make you part of the next phase of human evolution. In 5 to 10 years, open contact with non-human intelligence will be inevitable. When that happens, we'll need humans who can interface with both populations. You could be one of them. You could help guide humanity through the transition instead of being eliminated as a security risk." One of the beings leaned forward, and when it spoke, its voice bypassed my ears and formed directly in my brain, but cold, invasive, violating, nothing like the observer's warm telepathy. "You fear losing your humanity, but you would gain so much more. Clarity without the burden of emotion. Purpose without the confusion of conflicting loyalties. We offer evolution through integration, advancement through surrender of limited individual consciousness." I looked at Harrison and saw the truth in his modified eyes. He genuinely believed he was serving humanity's interests. The hybridization had rewritten his understanding so thoroughly he couldn't recognize his own compromise. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Harrison's expression shifted to something like pity. "Then, you become a security liability we can't allow to exist. You've seen too much, know too much. If you won't serve the program, you can't be permitted to expose it. Termination would be unfortunate but necessary. In that moment, with death or forced hybridization as my only apparent options, I felt the observer's presence touch my mind one final time. Third option. I can create a distraction giving you moments to run, escape to surface, transmit what you've documented. Even if you don't survive, truth must reach the uncompromised. Humanity must know what's coming. Are you ready to sacrifice everything for your species? I didn't hesitate, just sent back a pulse of affirmation and waited. The distraction came as an explosion that rocked the entire level. The observer had somehow accessed the facility's power systems and overloaded them, creating cascading failures, plunging level 10 into darkness and emergency lighting. In the chaos, I ran, smashing through the door and sprinting toward stairwell access because elevators would be locked down. Behind me, I could hear shouting, alarms, and the distinctive sound of energy weapons firing. The observer must have breached containment and was fighting its way toward me, buying time with its own freedom or life. I made it 3 levels up before they caught up. Hybrid guards with weapons and enhanced speed making them nearly impossible to evade. The firefight in the stairwell was brief and brutal. I took down 2 of them before catching an energy blast that burned through my shoulder and sent me crashing against concrete. As I lay bleeding, trying to maintain consciousness, I pulled out my phone and hit the dead man's switch I'd programmed, uploading everything to encrypted servers, sending copies to journalists and activists and government oversight committees, releasing months of evidence about what the facility was really doing. The observer appeared at the top of the stairwell, its luminescence flickering and dimmed, clearly injured from whatever battle it had fought to reach me. It knelt beside me, and I felt its telepathic presence one final time. You did it. The evidence is transmitted. Truth will spread even if we don't survive. I must go now. The coalition is calling me home, extracting me before recapture. But you, Marcus, you changed everything. One human who chose conscience over survival, truth over complicity. That choice echoes across dimensions. When your species finally joins the collective, your decision will be remembered as the moment humans proved they deserved their design destiny. Then it was gone, vanishing in a way suggesting teleportation or dimensional shift, leaving me alone with hybrid guards closing in and blood pooling beneath me. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was satisfaction, not at surviving, because I probably wouldn't, but at completing the mission, at ensuring humanity would know the truth, even if I didn't live to see what they did with it. I'm recording this from a cell in a facility that officially doesn't exist, waiting for whatever they decide to do with me. The gunshot wounds healed faster than they should have. Apparently, some of my genetic activation sequences triggered from proximity to the observer, giving me enhanced healing that will probably just prolong whatever interrogation or termination they have planned. But it doesn't matter, because the evidence is out there now. By the time you hear this, humanity will be facing revelations that challenge everything we thought we knew about our origins, our purpose, and our future. The activation is accelerating. More people every day developing abilities they can't explain, seeing things they weren't supposed to perceive, feeling the pull of something vast calling them toward transformation. Open contact is coming within years, not decades. And when it happens, you need to remember, not all aliens are friends. Not all offered enhancements are beneficial, and the government's version of disclosure will be designed to maintain control rather than reveal truth. Remember that God exists, but not as religion taught, as collective consciousness we're destined to join, as evolution of awareness beyond individual limits, as invitation to transcend rather than command to obey. Remember that you were designed to be imperfect, that your emotions and free will and unpredictability are features making you valuable to something vastly greater than human civilization. And remember that when the choice comes, whether to accept forced integration from those who want to control your transformation or to develop naturally toward the collective you were engineered to join, Your humanity itself is worth preserving even as you evolve beyond its current limitations. They're coming for me now, but I die knowing I helped ensure my species will face its transformation with truth instead of lies, with choice instead of coercion, with understanding that we are not accidents or experiments, but designed bridges between isolation and cosmic communion. The observer called me chosen, but the truth is simpler. I was just broken enough to accept reality-shattering truth and lucky enough to act on it before the hybrids could stop me. Now it's your turn. The activation is beginning. The transformation is inevitable, and how humanity handles it will determine whether we fulfill our designed purpose or become just another harvested species that never reached its potential. Choose wisely. Choose truth. And when you finally join the collective that every religion called God, remember that one ex-soldier in a black site prison helped make sure you understood what you were really joining.